Ayan na. Kamusta kayo dyan? Mga kameta, patapos na ang taon. Ito na, of course, as the year begins to end, mag-reflection tayo ng konti-konti. Medyo kagabi, we were not in our best shape. Medyo kita nyo, I'm not still 100% yet. Pero dahil mahal namin kayo, i-share natin yung mga reflection natin habang we're a little bit, under the weather, no? At of course, isa sa mga reflections natin was aside from you have to take care of yourself more, wag mo i-push sarili mo to the hilt is etong this whole propaganda line that is coming out from a certain camp na sinasabi I see BBM is nothing but a new Aquino, kumbaga, no, na BBM is dilaw, or we should stop comparing, or we should stop going back to the Aquino versus BBM kind of fight and all of that. And I just felt there are a number of problems with that comparison because I think first of all, pag tinignan mo yung track record ni former President, late President Aquino Jr., Aquino III, sorry, kumpara kay Marcos Jr., there's a lot of differences. I mean, to begin with, of course, good governance agenda. Kamusta ang daan matuwid agenda ng kasalukuyan na administration. But more than that, I think there is also this nefarious attempt by a certain camp to lump the two together so that they make their own Lodi, their own idol, in the complete sense of the word, look like the anti-establishment figure, right? Parang the idea is that pag sinabi mo or in-argue mo na Aquinos and Marcoses, all of them are the same, you're essentially saying they're all establishment, Imperial Manila politicians. Therefore, the real alternative, the real great leader is si Tatay. Diba? Parang ganun yung line of argumentation. And to be honest, I mean, I agree with putting Marcos and Aquino in the same sentence when it comes to fighting for the West Philippine Sea. But even if I were to concede that, ang sasabihin ko dyan is malaki pa rin yung pagkakaiba ni President Aquino from President Marcos Jr., at least so far. And I think it's quite important to put the legacy of former President Aquino Jr. Wala na, I'm not my hundred. Wala na. Aquino the Third and Marcos Jr. into context. So first kay Marcos Jr., his term is, he's yet to hit the midway point. But the reality is that first year pa lang niya, President Aquino III, si Pinoy, we already knew na anong gusto niya mangyari sa buhay. No? Very clear siya doon sa kanyang objectives, especially yung kanyang daan matuwid agenda. Now, we can have a long conversation about how effective, how sincerely, how effectively that was implemented. But at least it was pretty clear what he stood for. No? And at least there was an attempt at good governance agenda. I'm not sure we're seeing that yet, right? Now, let's go back to this issue because there's a reason why I'm also wearing yellow now. This is not necessarily an expression of solidarity with one camp. But I just noticed na for 6 years, parang never ako nagsuot ng yellow except kung Brazil, right? Kung Brazil. And the yellow of Brazil national team, yung mga football jersey natin, yung mga basketball jersey natin, medyo iba siya dito sa yellow na gano'n. So, actually, just kanina lang naisip ko, bakit usutin ko talaga tong yellow shirt na yan? Because yellow is really a beautiful color. It's a beautiful color. It's a color of hope. It's a color of energy. It's a color of sun, right? In a way, it's a color of life, no? And I noticed one of the things that happened really under the previous administration was this demonization of not only a certain political camp, not only demonization of a former president, but the demonization of the beautiful, glorious, gorgeous color, which is yellow, right? And I think bilang mga Pinoy sa Asiano, this is a color that we would love. This is a color that you feel very comfortable with, no? So I just felt it's time for us to wear more yellow. I mean, that's what I'm gonna say, and it's time for us to also not be on the defensive, and actually take it to the other side, no? Especially dun sa mga Makapili Club, Makapili School of Diplomacy, Makapili Economics, Makapili School of Tatay Digong, yung mga ganun. Sorry, sa Makapili School. Alam niyo na, okay. No, ito. No, because just because you criticize Duterte doesn't mean na automatically dilawan ka. In the same way na just because Marcos Jr. is doing something that some supporters of Aquino like doesn't mean that Marcos Jr. is the same as Aquino, right? And this idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend also doesn't make sense. It is clear that the unity team is falling apart, so may hiduan sa pagitan ng mga Marcoses and Dutertes. Pero not necessarily dapat ang gagawin natin dito is ilalump si Marcos and Aquino into the same camp. So how do you resolve that fake dilemma? My argument is very simple. At yun yung naisip ko kahapon habang medyo nag-recover pa tayo and all. Sabi ko, actually, because si Duterte ay isang malaking aberration, he's just such an aberration, such an, outside the, beyond the pale kind of political figure in Philippine history. Now, of course, for some people, that makes him fantastic, anti-Semitic, but for some other people, it's like, wow, that makes him que horror. The point is that he was just so outside the curve that he makes other Filipino presidents look similar, right? Because he's an anti-establishment, demagogic figure, right? Suddenly, si BBM ay mukhang moderate establishment figure, right? And therefore, BBM suddenly looks much more similar to Aquino. So if this were to a spectrum, Digong will be all the way here, right? If this is like a 50 shades of gray, light gray to super dark gray. Like Digong is all the way there close to dark, super dark black color. And then like Aquino is, let's argue, for the sake of ideological differentiation, if I can. And dito sa light gray. And then si BBM, mas malapit kay Pinoy kaysa kay Digong, right? But that doesn't mean Pinoy and Marcos Jr. are necessarily same. It's just that yung isa ay sobrang layo sa lahat, naging mukhang yung dalawa ay nasa isang kampo, right? So that's the way I visualize etong propaganda line of attack na nakikita natin ngayon. Even if I would consider that when it comes to some of his basic sensibilities, right? Marcos Jr. is much closer to, and I think this is where I agree with my good colleague, si Lisandro Claudio. Marcos Jr. is ironically your traditional post-Marcos Filipino president, right? He is operating within the quote-unquote Aquino constitution, right? So far, we're not saying a direct assault on that, but things could change as conversations over constitutional change gain steam, especially after 2025 elections. But so far, BBM looks like a very traditional post-Marcos EDSA regime president, while Duterte was so outside, just so outside the box, beyond the pale, in a completely different, if there's a quadrant here, sobrang outside there, it makes BBM and Aquino look like they're inside the same box. But that's not true. It's the aberration of Duterte that makes other presidents look similar, even though those other presidents are significantly different from each other, right? But as I said, there's a propaganda value to that argument. Kasi pag sinabi mo ay Pinoy at Aquino ay similar, isang kampo lang sila, clearly ang ginagawa mo is you're glorifying Digong as the outside, anti-establishment, genuine alternative candidate. Now, of course, si Digong himself, I don't know if he'll be in a position to run for presidency or even any high office anytime soon. But the daughter is still there. The vice president is still there. So, ang basa ko dito, may ganyan na elemento nangyari dyan. May ganyan propaganda para re-energize yung atin to pre, hindi atin to dun sa Christmas convoy sa web. Pero yung atin to pre, tayo talaga, real change is coming, populist kind of mobilization. Is it gonna work? No, I completely doubt that. Right? And kaya, syempre, mga response natin sa mga kaibigan natin is mostly sarcastic, right? Yung mga tipong, sabi na, syempre, they want to say Digong was exceptional, he had such a high approval ratings, etc., which is true, right? But I can give you a whole host of very questionable leaders, Putin, and even more questionable ones, who also have very high approval ratings. There's a very thin. In fact, I would say it's an inverse relationship, right? Yung relationship between popularity and competence. The two do not necessarily go hand in hand. Sometimes, actually, the best presidents are very unpopular because doing the right thing is very unpopular most of the time. So popularity is not necessarily an indicator of merit and competence, right? And this is the argument I've made that, did not sit well with a lot of our friends. It's also hard to trust the validity of surveys in climates of fear, right? So when I hear about surveys popularity of Putin, It's like, yeah, let's say someone calls you in Russia and says, "Hello, I'm Mr. I don't know, Kadyrov calling you from, I want to know your opinion of our great leader, Mr. Putin. Do you like him? You do not like him?" If you're in Russia, you're crazy to say I don't like Putin over phone, right? Or if someone knocks on your door, "Hello, my name is, you know what I'm saying? In a climate of fear, preferences are psychologically and sometimes more than psychologically already manipulated, already self-censored, right? Now, we're not in a Putin-esque dictatorship situation. I always argue that Duterte was not even competent enough to be a dictator. But the reality is that the climate of fear was always a factor. Now, that doesn't mean that he was not popular. I still believe that President Duterte was popular. But so were other presidents at certain point in time. I mean, most of our presidents had 50, 60% approval ratings, throughout their term in office, right? Of course, it ended on, But even the bigger argument is, even if I were to grant that he was genuinely popular and it had nothing to do with fear and all of that, so what? So what? I mean, just because you're popular doesn't mean you're right, right? As I said, good presidents tend to be not so popular because doing the right thing makes you unpopular. Now, having said all of those things, mag-focus tayo sa dalawang bagay, no? Unang-una, again, sarcastic ako, di ba? Yan ang problema, hindi na-guess ng tao na sarcastic tayo. I mean, yan ang problema ng mga tao ng ibang dyan. Unang-una, isn't it ironic na parating sinisabi ni Digong na weak leader at spoiled brat, itong isang to. And then, pag tinignan mo yung West Philippine Sea disputes, it's actually President Marcos Jr. who is showing far more, courage and tenacity in dealing with China than the previous president who was like, wala tayong magagawa, let's be meek, let's be humble, yung mga puro mga ganyan-ganyan. And of course, if you want to see a proper analysis of the context of Marcos Jr. going quote-unquote toe-to-toe with China and talking about new paradigm, please check out my latest article on Asia Times, why Marcos Jr. wants to go toe-to-toe with China. Philippine president has defied expectations. He would follow his predecessor in kowtowing to China in the South China Sea. Salamat sa mga editors natin dyan. Hindi ako gumawa ng mga subtitle na yan. But please check out this article. You'll see how I explain that actually, ironically, Marcos Jr. has turned out far more confrontational towards China and less weakling as some people would have suggested. And if anything, between Duterte and Marcos Jr., alam natin sino mas matapang sa West Philippines at sinong mas ganyan-ganyan sa China. Again, hindi po US ang gustong, magsakop, hindi ang US ang sumasakop dito sa West Philippine Sea. Alright? Let's be very clear about that. So, huwag kayong magpagulo. Ay, pero what about West? What about ganyan? Alright? If Digong was really against all imperialist powers in history, bakit wala siyang sinabing masama sa Japan ever since? Pansin nyo? Si Digong, sobrang beshi siya sa Japan. Well, guess what? If you want to talk about Balangiga bells 100 years ago, why are you not talking about what Imperial Japan, horrible things they did to us during Second World War in the 1940s, which is far more recent than the Balangiga bells situation? So doon pala nakita mo na, walang basihan itong argument ni Digong na anti-Western, anti-imperialist. Kung galit ka sa West for what they did 100 years ago, dapat galit ka rin sa Japan sa ginawa nila 70 years ago. Oh, bakit ang beshi-beshi mo sa Japan? See? Huli ko sila Huli ko yung mga ganyan, mga ganyan pa-effect na anti-colonial, post-colonial effect. Alam na natin yan, yung mga fake na ganyan. Kasi yung fake nung ganyang 6 months, ayusin ko yung mga problema, mga effect na ganyan. Anyway, basahin yung mga kameta na explain natin dyan. So, I think President Marcos Jr. deserves far more credit for taking a tough stance dyan sa West Philippine Sea. We can have a long discussion about whether this is the best way forward, but my contention is, if we do not stand our ground, we're not gonna get respect. And if we don't get respect, we're just gonna be bullied right and left. And, again, dun sa Makapili, mga kaibigan natin ng mga Makapili Club, yung mga Makapili Economics, School of Diplomacy, yung mga gusto mag-mention ng Vietnam. By the way, Vietnam, it's true, is getting billions of dollars of investments from China, but that's not because Vietnam is suddenly giving up their claims or not standing up to China sa South China Sea or East Sea. Actually, Vietnam made it absolutely clear, right, during yung pagbisita ni Xi Jinping sa Hanoi recently, that sovereignty and territorial integrity has to be respected. So, ang China, gets nila, matapang tong Vietnam, di nila pwedeng buli-bulin lang. They just had to accept it grudgingly that they have to deal with Vietnam as it is. And they're not gonna have things easy. And the reason why Chinese invest in Vietnam is because of geography. because Vietnam is so close to the Pearl River Delta, the Greater Bay Area production networks of China. It's because Vietnam has direct access to Western markets. It has a free trade agreement with the United States, free trade agreement with the European Union. It is part of the CPTPP with Japan, Australia, and a number of other countries. So if you're a Chinese investor, it's good to have a foothold in Vietnam. Not to mention, Vietnam has a sufficiently robust industrial manufacturing base already and a far more decent infrastructure and regulatory environment compared to, let's be honest, compared to Philippines for that matter. So please lang, huwag niyo i-spin yan, right? So I think President Marcos Jr. is correct to insist that hindi pwede yung magpapaganyan-ganyan lang tayo, di ba? We have to stand our ground. We have to leverage our multilateral engagements. And President Marcos Jr. will be visiting an ASEAN country soon to also build bilateral cooperation with some of the key ASEAN countries. As I said, ASEAN 10, just north of useless in terms of helping us the West Philippine Sea. But some of the key ASEAN countries could be helpful to us. But let me go to the last part, really, of this discussion, which I think is very, very important, mga kameta. Because if you look at it, if you really look at it, how should I put it? I have been very critical of the liberals in this country. I've been very critical of liberal reformist administrations in this country. Although, admittedly, I was always slightly more understanding of the Ramos administration, considering its starting point, than perhaps the other liberal reformist administration. But regardless of that, I mean, look at it. Kaya natatawa ako dun sa mga yung mga trolls dyan na dilawan, ganyan. Like, hello, I mean, if you guys, kung literate kayo, mag-Google lang kayo, hindi naman mahirap mag-Google, just look at all of those critical things I wrote about the previous administration throughout the years. No, I mean, I was actually critical of the Aquino administration's South China Sea policy. Sa aking palagay, masyado siyang confrontational towards China, without, at the same time making sure we do our assignment on the ground. Kaya kung tingnan nyo itong article ko na Philippines Lopsided South China Sea Strategy, sabi ko, puro kayong mga legal arbitration, puro kayong mga diplomatic ekek. Ang kulang sa inyo, hindi nyo pinapalakas yung na-fortify yung position natin on the ground. Yung airstrip natin sa Pag-asa, mukhang kawawa. Yung Sierra Madre dyan sa Second Thomas Shoal, wala, dilapidated na, it's falling apart. So, okay, maganda yan. Magpadala kayo ng mga tao, magja-junket kayo dyan sa international courts. Hindi naman. In fairness, they didn't do that. But you get what I'm saying? Like, okay, it's fantastic. Go to international court, blah, blah, blah. But you have to do your assignment. You have to fortify our position on the ground. Whether sa Ayungin Shoal, whether sa Pag-asa. In fairness, the administration that started doing that again for the first time since Marcos Sr. is Digong's administration. Lorenzana was the one who oversaw the fortification. So I have been critical of the previous, and I raised this issue with the late Foreign Secretary Del Rosario, and his argument was, we have to have moral high ground, and I disagree with that. I don't think na mutual exclusive na we file for an arbitration award and then we essentially tie our own hands at the back, considering we were already behind the curve. Because actually, legally speaking, you can talk to any international law expert. I had to talk to many international law experts from all around the world when I was writing my book, Asia's New Battlefield. It's absolutely clear. Changing the nature of disputed features is against international law. But fortifying what's already there without changing the nature of disputed features, that's not against international law. So, yung Pag-asa, isla na yun eh. It's already a rock at the very least. So, fixing the airstrip there is not against international law. Alright? But if ginawa mo siyang super gigantic island, katulad ng ginawa ng China, that's illegal. And that goes against international law. So, I just felt masyadong timid yung ating policy on the ground. I was also very critical of the economic policy of the Aquino administration, for instance, right? One of the things I always focused, and then there's, yung mga economist friend natin, yung mga Google Trends Club friends natin dyan. Yan. Yung isa dyan, nung may mga nag-quote sa akin na sabi nga ni Hey Darian, ganito yung inequality of income generation sa Philippines. Sabi niya, saan yung ginawa? Ayan, kinorek ko siya tuloy. Yan kasi, hindi kasi nagbabasa eh. Ito in 2011, the 40 richest families in the Philippines Forbes Wealth List accounted for 76% of the country's gross domestic product growth. So 76% of every 6% growth every year. That's just short of 5%. So kung nag 6% growth ang Pilipinas every year, this is in early 2010s, 4 to 5% just goes to 40 richest families. This is the worst in Asia, compared with Thailand, where the top 40 richest accounted for 33.7%, less than half of the Philippines. And look at Thailand, ang gulo ng politics nila. Malaysia is only 5.6% and Japan is 2.8%. Alright? Ipopost ko dito para makita niyo na gaano kamalala yung situation sa Pilipinas when it comes to yung control ng mga oligarchies sa ating economic structure. Right? I'll explain to you shortly. Of course, you're gonna say, it's 2011, 12, kakapasok lang ni Pinoy. Why you're blaming him, blah, blah, blah. But first of all, let's get the facts straight. Okay, this is the number. Okay, we are the most unequal nation in Asia and one of the worst on earth. All right, crazy. 40 richest families took home 76% of newly created growth. Now, a lot of people who are not very, subtle in reading, they thought 76% of entire wealth in the Philippines is owned by 40 families. Not necessarily. This just says 76% of newly created wealth. So kung every year dumagdag tayo ng $20 billion sa ating GDP, gross domestic product, 76% of that, close to $15 billion of that, goes to only 40 families. Right? Only 40 families. And back then, Henry C. and Lucio Tan were both worth a combined $13.6 billion. Right? In a country where tens of millions of people live under the poverty line. Our situation is more than twice worse than Thailand, already a very unequal and politically unstable country. A lot of political instability in Thailand has to do with inequality of growth. You go to Bangkok, very well-developed metropolis, and then there's no other major city in Thailand of comparison. I don't think Chiang Mai is anywhere close to that. Chiang Mai to Bangkok is like, Baguio to Manila. I mean, I love Baguio, I'm proud of it, but it's not really comparison, right? They barely have a Cebu to a Manila, right? Forget about, a Los Angeles to a New York. So it's a very imbalanced and equal country. We're twice worse than Thailand, more than twice worse. And Malaysia is only 5.6%. So Malaysia also has its own oligarchs. Mahathir has its own oligarchs, including the guy who built the Petronas Towers, right? That guy behind it, before Petronas had to bail it out, that guy was known as an oligarch of Mahathir, right? But Malaysia is only 5.6%. Japan is not even 3%. So we're like more than 25 times worse than Japan, already a very wealthy country with a per capita income of 8 times us in terms of inequality of distribution of new wealth. So, I hope people understand. Ako, medyo critical ako sa AQUINO administration because sa tingin ko, masyado silang standard sa kanilang policies. They did not come out with any really outside the box and important industrial trade policies to make the Philippines a manufacturing power. Name me a single major industrial policy that was introduced during the AQUINO administration to help us build our own version of VinFast or our own version of, Proton of Malaysia. Forget about, Hyundai or whatever, right? Wala. Industrial policy is the reason why Vietnam is building its own electric cars right now. Industrial policy is the reason why. What is industrial policy? You coordinate with your oligarchs and big businesses to push them in the direction to build world-class technologies and industries. We didn't have that. What we had was standard economic practices and macroprudential policies which did not fundamentally change the structure of the Philippine economy. Kaya nung bumaba si Aquino, the Philippines was still and not a country far from being a manufacturing power, and we're still kulelat among our peers in terms of attracting investments and all of that. No? So that's the reason why I felt Aquino was doing okay within the existing framework, but he had to go way beyond that to really dramatically change the landscape. That's why I was critical. Kaya yung mga, bobo dyan and say, hey, Darian, Dilawan, etc. Like, are you kidding me? Have you read all of these critical things I've been reading? Obviously, these people don't read, but it's a rhetorical question. I'm just exposing, what kind of fools these people are. But you see, that's my point. Kaya I always felt you're not gonna impress me as a new administration president unless you have something significant to bring to the table, because the situation is really bad in terms of inequality of growth. I was also critical of the Haiyan situation. Look at this article I wrote, Philippines Haiyan tragedy, what went wrong. So I look at the not in a DDS way, critical, but in a fair way, based on evidence way, critical. I also had a number of articles on the Mama Sapano situation. In fact, I just figured I had apparently this interview on Mama Sapano and how I felt that that was a big blow to the popularity of former President Aquino and all of that. So you can go on and find a lot of articles that he wrote that were quite critical of the Aquino administration and all of that, right? So you can check in this article also. I explain things. But having said all of those things, I think Aquino at least got some of the basic things right. He didn't go really outside the box and introduce something significant, but he got one of the basic things right. And in fact, it was under President Aquino that we began to make some of the first good steps. Ayan, yung mga natin dyan, kukunin lang nila itong part na to tatanggalin nila lahat ng mga sinabi ko kanina, kukunin lang nila itong mga part na to. Alam mo yung mga yun na yan. But, let me just be very clear about this. The whole idea that the Philippines is supposing a rising tiger in Asia, sobrang annoying yan. Because I kept on hearing that during the previous administration. Salamat kay Tatay Digong. Ano na tayo? Rising Asian tiger, blah, blah. No, I said, excuse me. This was under Pinoy. Alright? So this is a Philippine Star article, February 2013. Alright? Yung mga henyo dyan. Sinong presidente natin in 2013? Hindi si Tatay Digong. Alright? Nakadilaw shirt pa yata siya nung paano yan. Election ba yan? Nung 20... Okay. Tingnan yung mga elections time. Kasama ni Digong at saka si Marcos. Okay, anyway. At interestingly, if you zoom in into this article, Davao City pa is where this announcement was made. So, there was this meeting in Davao, and the person there was Moto Kunishi. Ito yung Hapon na economist, was in charge of the Philippines portfolio sa World Bank. This is the 2013 Philippine Development Forum, and it took place in Marco Polo Hotel. Of course, alam niyo naman, di ba? Marco Polo Hotel, alam mo naman, di ba? The whole Davao, the people, Okay, so actually dito, nagkaroon ng announcement, inanunsyo ng World Bank expert, ng Pilipinas is now considered as a rising Asian tiger economy. Because at least the one good thing and one important good thing that President President Aquino, the third, was able to establish was just enough stability, just enough good governance signaling, not really fully sufficient. We can have a long conversation, to at least make the world think of us as anything but kind of a sick man of Asia again. I mean, it just allowed us to slowly get rid of that sick man of Asia label, and it allowed us to be taken more seriously by investors and international community. And in fairness to President Aquino, it was under his term that we had the highest average growth rate of any Philippine president recent memory. That's a fact that we cannot get rid of. Now, does that make him a fantastic president? As I said, for me, a fantastic president is someone who's fundamentally changed the structure of Philippine economy so that hindi 40 families take home 5% out of 6% growth. Right? That's crazy. Hindi yung situation na yung Philippines is twice worse than Thailand in inequality and 20 times worse than, Malaysia, and 30 times, worse than Japan. That's crazy. Those numbers are crazy. So you really need a radical president to really put the Philippines on the right path. But in terms of just getting the most out of what we had, I think President Aquino did a pretty decent job. And I think he deserves some credit for that. That's why I think there's no shame in, folks saying that they voted for Aquino at some point in time, or they supported Aquino at some point in time. But at the same time, you have to be also open to constructive criticism, right? You have to be open to the idea that, we needed even more than that. And precisely because we were not able to bring about yung massive transformation in the economy, nagtataka kayo bakit bumotang tao sa isang katulad ni Digong in 2016? I mean, for me, the biggest question, when I wrote the book, The Rise of Duterte, the biggest question I had, of course I have to probably have a sequel now, but the question I had was not that someone like Duterte won in 2016. The biggest question I had was, why someone like Duterte did not come earlier? Because in a country where 40 families take home 3/4 of newly created growth, you're asking for political disaster. You're asking for trouble. Oh, and by the way, it's also a country where political dynasties control 80% of elected offices in the legislature. I mean, this is a mockery of any claim to being a progressive democratic nation, right? So again, kudos to President Aquino for getting, like squeezing the most out of the available lemon or whatever you had it. But we needed something bigger, something more radical and different. And the radical option became Duterte, and that was unfortunate because I felt that was not the right radical option. It was the wrong radical option, as most of us got to know later on. I mean, look at his economic performance: 5 quarters of recession from 2020 to 2021, worst in Southeast Asia. Look at his performance in the handling pandemic, worst in Southeast Asia. Look at more than 100 children killed by 2020 during AJKs, thousands of other suspicious deaths, worst anywhere in the post-colonial world, or at least in Southeast Asia or Asia. I mean, ICC is already in the country conducting investigation right now. They're not doing that in any other of our major neighbors because we got the worst situation in terms of the EJK situation. And I can go on and on and on about the shortcomings of that supposedly radical option. Wrong radical option, unfortunately. But the reality is that we do need a radical reorganization of the Philippine society and economy, because what we have right now is not providing the wealth, is not providing the opportunities that ordinary Filipinos deserve. So I'm happy that some of my middle class friends, some of my internationally educated friends were happy and successful during the Aquino years, but also think about tens of millions of Filipinos who are still under contractual works, who didn't have security of tenure. Think of millions of precariat and proletariat Filipinos, right, who didn't see a significant improvement in their living conditions. And that is why I don't believe that Marcos Jr., as he stands, is still that kind of solution to our country, And I won't be surprised that, again, some sort of radical politics could come back down the road, maybe no longer Duterte, but something else, if we do not get to the bottom of the problem. So the political dynasty problem, we always talk about that. So I don't even need to post it, but there's this very interesting article, I think it's by Dean Tihanki. I have the graph and numbers here. I mean, grabe yung Filipinas, diba? Like, political dynasties, like 60, 70, 80% of elected offices. That's crazy. No other quote-unquote democracy has a situation like that. But even worse is our economy, how concentrated growth is. So, having said that, again, this is how you do political analysis. You don't say President A is heaven, President B is hell, President C is heaven. That's kid stuff. That's puerile. A proper analysis looks at the 50 shades, right? Looks at 10 different metrics, and then, accordingly, makes a judgment of 1 out of 100. Right? You don't give 0 or 100. That's kid stuff. Kaya inis na inis ako dun sa mga political analysts. Anong score mo kay president nung speech niya? 0. Speech niya 10. Yung mga, come on. Get out of here, right? That's not mature. That's puerile, right? You don't do it that way. At I want to also end on this point, mga kameta. This is why do not blame our kababayans. Yung mga bumoto sa mga candidates na sa tingin nyo hindi karapat-dapat dun sa position. A lot of that vote was out of anger, grievance, and frustration. And anger and grievance and frustration because when we had relatively good leaders, they really did not fundamentally change the nature of the Philippine society. They did not fundamentally change the extreme inequalities bedeviling our economy and our political system. So surprised ba kayo that people are skeptical of democracy? Surprised kayo that more and more people are open to authoritarian demagogic leaders? You shouldn't be surprised. And to dismiss that as, disinformation lang yan. And I mean, of course there's disinformation, but why would people fall for disinformation if the education system is strong, if people are happy with the economic conditions, if political dynasties are not dominating all offices? And by the way, to be clear, the concentration of political dynasties in the Congress actually worsened in the 2010s under you-know-who president, right? So there was absolutely no solution to the fundamental problems facing the country. But again, having said that, we have to give credit where credit is due. I think in terms of at least building the fundamentals and making the most out of what was there, I think Aquino deserved some credit for that. And for that reason, we're a little bit more yellow. Don't be ashamed of that. And if the mga ka-DDS natin dyan are trying to troll you, troll them back. Do what I do, right? Bakit? Diba? Who are they to tell us what should we wear, what color is good, what color is not good? Wala silang moral ascendancy whatsoever. Alright? On that note, thank you very much. Mga kameta, sorry, medyo slow yung pag-build ng argument natin dito because not only, this is a complicated issue, but, I'm not at my best 100% to be honest, all right? So thank you very much for your patience, for your love and your support. And hopefully we can catch up soon, God willing, after Christmas. Please, wag kayong magalit sa akin, wag niyo ako i-troll masyado. Or sige, troll niyo ako, maganda naman yung engagement. Basta, tuloy-tuloy lang ang laban at pagmamahal namin sa inyo. And hopefully, God willing, if we have time, we'll do another year-ender. Tingnan natin, kung wala si L, kahit kami ni R&R na lang ulit. Alright? On that note, thank you very much, God bless. Please, huwag kayong magalit. You see, this is how I analyze different administration. I look at many angles. Obviously, what I did in the past 40 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, is just a snippet. If you bother to read my works, books, whatever, you can see that I go through the whole gambit, right? To properly analyze the record of individual presidents and administration, because this is how you do analysis. This is the proper way of doing analysis. Hindi yung, ito ay demonyo, ito ay anghel, yung mga ganun. What are we? I mean, we're not 12 years old. A mature democracy doesn't go from 0 to 10, right? It's a matter of just getting the best outcome possible in each elections. And, right? Everyone is entitled to make mistakes in their life. We're just human beings. So do not judge people just because they voted for a candidate you feel was horrible, even if that candidate indeed was horrible, right? Especially if you see them already showing a certain degree of self-awareness, introspection, and a certain degree of remorse. Ako, I'm kind person. And at the same time, just because a certain president was bad doesn't make your preferred candidate necessarily a good one. We never know. Never know. Baka kung nanalo naman yung kandidato niyo, palpak din. So, I'm just saying, keep an open mind. Do not demonize other Filipinos. And understand. Compassion and critical thinking. Right? Marami sa ating mga kababayan ay desperate for real dramatic change. Real good change. Not just real change, but real good change. So don't be surprised if populism will be back again sooner than later. In the meantime, party! Alright, si Junior, our president! Party! Okay, relax lang tayo dyan. Okay, on that note, thank you very much. God bless and advance Merry Christmas.